Did you find procurement, or did procurement find you?
Oh, procurement found me, definitely. I think I got involved with procurement more by accident than by intent. It was, I think, my first or second consulting study. I was available, and there was a staffing need at this consulting firm. And as they say, availability becomes a skill, and I got assigned to that study. But I think I've been in procurement for over 25 years at this point, and I stayed put in procurement. And I think that's perhaps even more interesting as to why I did that. And I would say it's for three reasons, right? One is when I had my first and second, and frankly, even today, the studies that I get to be involved in and lead, I find procurement continues to be this very underappreciated function and very underhyped, frankly. You still hear jokes like, that's where people go to retire, or for those of the folks in the audience who have heard the song Hotel California by Eagles, it's like you can check it anytime you like, but you can never leave. You know, and it's really disheartening for someone like myself who's done this for so long, because procurement has a very clear, tangible, measurable value proposition, right? And so certainly as a consultant and an external agent for change, it's been fascinating to be in this space, serve clients, and really help transform at least the perception of procurement from being a bargain hunter to a business partner.
Do you find that perception of procurement has changed in the last 25 years? I know we're feeling like we're banging against that door, trying to increase the relevancy of procurement. And sometimes you see that there's bright lights through the door, and we were able to kind of step through. And oftentimes it feels like we're still in the same position that we were, because I started 25 years ago as well. We're still in the same position that we were, back 25 years ago.
Yeah, I do think we made progress. I do think, and there is hope, right? I think it's a mixed bag. So where we are right now, we're in a period of transition. You do have companies where, for example, a stint in procurement is a requisite to getting into the CXO ranks, right? You have other companies where a person who is in charge of procurement and a couple of other topics like sustainability, et cetera, are actually have a boardroom position. So that's the positive, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, though, you still have folks, I serve clients where, at least when we start out the transformation, procurement is embedded deep in the business. It's like 5 levels below a CXO executive. And that in itself says that, yes, there's room to grow in terms of how it's being perceived and how it is being treated, frankly, in terms of level of involvement and degree of participation.
Do you see that the pace of change has changed? You talked about, the role that you often play as a change agent within these organizations. And I think if we're being critical about ourselves in procurement, we say that we're often slow to change and followers rather than leaders. And there's some good reasons for that, the complexity of procurement and how many kind of touch points it has within the business. But do you see that that's changing, that now the procurement, and from a leadership perspective, we're being a little bit more curious, a little bit more change oriented, and not being so kind of risk averse that I think perhaps we were in the past?
I think there are two parts to that question. One is procurement itself from the inside out. Is it changing faster? I think in some cases, yes. And one of the proponents or the catalyst for that is digital. Procurement is one of those functions that has embraced the digital disruption, perhaps with more gusto and enthusiasm than some of the other functions. So that has certainly allowed the ability to increase the velocity of change from the inside. From the outside in, I do think that some geopolitical events as well as natural events like COVID helped catalyze procurement's elevation and visibility within the functions, within the organization, in terms of, suddenly procurement was seen as the main vehicle to mitigate the risk, secure supply, etc. And suddenly it became way more important than anyone had ever thought. It's not just about cost cutting, it's about security of supply. And guess who can do that? It's procurement. So in some ways, COVID helped procurement.
Did it also, I think we go through these cycles of when we think about value beyond savings, of what that means, right? And there was the cycle of that means supplier innovation and driving revenue. And that's kind of the holy grail for procurement, is to get into that revenue driving function. But the past few years seems like it's, the kind of pendulum is focused all the way to risk. And now we're becoming a risk management function. So it's around mitigation, of which cost is one risk factor, but it's one of many risk factors. And that's kind of the area that we're generally playing right now, as opposed to the innovation, revenue generator, sales generator that we kind of have aspired to.
And like with everything, right, Phil, the pendulum swings. And I do think with, as supply chains stabilize, inflation is coming down, etc., the pendulum will swing back, and it'll perhaps be a bit more balanced between the risk, and then hopefully we'll start pivoting into, frankly, more interesting and more impactful topics like supply innovation, supply development, and a totally different level of supply collaboration. I do believe, right? I think one of the markers of a leading procurement function is one that sees suppliers as more than a source of supply. It's a source of value and innovation. And some sectors and companies in particular have done a marvelous job of that.
Yeah, we often say there's so much that the total of the R&D capability of your supply base far outstrips even the world's largest R&D investor in internal R&D.
Precisely.
And that's where that capability is. And it's really there to be embraced by those who are creating those relationships with suppliers, where those suppliers want to share their R&D with you.
Exactly. That's exactly. And they'll share with some of their strategic suppliers, those who are easy to do business with. Consumer products and automotive are two sectors that have done a great job of really tapping into the broader R&D capabilities of the supply base. Yeah.
So we kind of came together for today's recording to talk about priorities, the CPO priorities over the next couple of years. We're recording this beginning of December 2024. So the election is almost a month in the rearview mirror now, and everyone's kind of setting up for what the next couple of years might look like. Where do you see some of the priorities and of all the CPOs that you're obviously talking to on a daily basis really focusing on in the next couple of years?
Yeah. It's a great question. And frankly, I'll probably cheat a little bit and reference some of the annual procurement surveys that McKinsey conducts, where we ask CPOs about their priorities. But the last one we conducted was before the elections. And I'll just highlight the top three things that came up. And I can deep dive into each of those. The first one, of course, is around saving money, right? Clawing back price increases that suppliers had passed on during COVID, and getting back to more normalized price levels after the peak inflation. We see that continuing to be a priority. But I think in that context too, we see this as an opportunity for companies to refresh their category strategy, right? Where they're looking at not only commercial levers, but looking at demand and spec. And here again, really factoring in the impact of Gen AI, for example, right? Because the ability of Gen AI to reduce demand, for example, in marketing, some of the work that creative agencies are doing, could that be automated, or some document preparation by paralegals in legal and so on, right? So that is, again, this could be very much should be baked into the broader theme, if you will, a priority of saving money. The second one is talent. We see a lot of organizational stress in the system. Procurement continues to be asked to do more with less, right? In fact, a little bit of research that we had done, we found that the spend managed today per procurement FTE is 50% higher than it was 5 years ago. And so along with that, you have increasing expectations around, like we said, securing supply, managing risk, supporting the sustainability agenda, etc. All of this means that the procurement professional of the future has to have a vastly different skill profile than maybe 5 or 10 years ago, right? And so investment in upskilling, and again, which skills are needed that are most critical for procurement practitioners? Yeah, you need category expertise, but perhaps strategic thinking, problem solving, analytical aptitude, right? Those are the kinds of skills. And the whole notion of all-star athletes versus singular category experts. That is kind of the theme for the priority for most CPOs. The third one, of course, it would be disingenuous not to include digital. In fact, the need to accelerate digital enablement, saw the sharpest increase in the CPO priorities from the spring of 2023 to the spring of 2024. And there's a whole discussion we can have, and I'll save it for later perhaps, on what do we mean by digital? Because digital is not just Gen AI. Yes, that's the buzzword for today, but digital is cloud tools, intake and orchestration, AI, as well as Gen AI, right? Those were the things that we heard in the survey, but this was pre-election. And I do think if I were to look into the future, agility has got to be the key priority for CPOs. We are, and this is perhaps just my personal perspective, probably shared by many others, we seem to be at least entering into an era of mercantilism and economic nationalism. And that means and that's at a macroeconomic level, obviously, right? But that means procurement's role has to be to develop flexible strategies that can respond to geopolitical disruptions, not natural disasters. Of course, that's important, but geopolitical disruptions, tariffs and counter tariffs, etc., and adjust quickly, because needless to say, your TCO is going to change depending on where the tariffs are being applied. And you can't be sitting and waiting for a year before you can change your strategies. That just will not work.
Yeah, I definitely feel that following the election, it kind of creates this another period for the procurement and supply chain collectively can be extremely impactful in the next few years because of all this, because of the unknowns, because tariff threats and impact that could have on inflation. Just with, I think, generational moves in supply chain and supply chain locations, and not even necessarily nearshoring or reshoring, but just more diversity of sources of supply in different locations. All of those things are things that we're really well placed and positioned to support the business in. And I think that those will, while in one way you think, well, it's kind of frustrating because it gets away from that, we want to expand our value proposition. However, those are things that procurement and supply chain does really well, and it's going to be in a lot of need. So many, I'm sure you hear it as well, so many CPOs you hear right now doing scenario planning for all of the different kind of eventualities, which, again, we haven't necessarily done a good job of before, of being proactive in planning for all these different eventualities.
Spot on, Phil. And I think some of it, I go back to COVID again. There was lots of things that were not good about COVID. In fact, everything was not good about COVID, right? Period. But it did also expose a lot of supply chain CPOs, companies, if you will, to the fact that a large percentage of the supply base had either intentionally, but more likely inadvertently become single sourced, right? And that just, woke them up, and then they had to take reactions to react to that particular situation to secure supply. But again, as we enter this period of geopolitical uncertainty, this is also going to become very important, right? In terms of diversifying the supply base, not geographically only, but also country-wide, by countries and economic systems and so on.
I want to talk a little bit about the three different elements, but as you're sharing them, a thought came to mind around operating models. And is the approach that we should be looking at is kind of building a new operating model for procurement versus trying to be a little bit more effective and efficient in our existing models? Is it time for us to kind of reimagine how procurement operates because of all this different change, the challenges that come with it, the do more with less, rather than just, like I say, try and be a bit more effective in what we've always done?
Definitely. I think so. But it depends upon an organization's capacity to absorb change, right? So ultimately, how you get there might vary by company, right? But reimagining the operating model, reimagining the procurement function is a necessity. And I think some of the leaders, and this is probably another source of daylight between leaders and laggards, right? Who are willing to jump ahead. We are seeing companies that we serve, for example, adopt the notion of agile procurement, where, again, going back to the concept of all-star athletes versus category experts, you now basically have this notion of fixed category teams that are not sized for peak load, but it's more of an agile flow to work model with smaller category teams that are then supplemented by experts as and when needed, right? So it's just a fundamentally different way of organizing yourselves. The notion of, I personally believe the procurement organization of the future is going to be 20 to possibly even 50% smaller, right? You'll have more autonomous buying. The whole notion of AI, Gen AI and AI agents is going to really drive a lot of digitization of activities, and not just tasks, but end-to-end processes that hitherto were being done by humans, right? The notion of really procurement becoming more of an invisible hand that's guiding the organization in the procurement things, as opposed to being the executor of that, right? I think that those are the kinds of changes that I can see happening, which means it's a fundamentally different model than it is today.
I think those potentials is very exciting for people who've been in procurement who want to drive change for a long time, because there have been things that we've been talking about for a long time and desiring, but not necessarily having the technological capability to go and deliver upon. And now we have some of that ability for procurement to get out of the way for a lot of things, but in a way where there is still that the governance behind the scenes and knowledge about where money is being spent, and as you said, that invisible hand directing where money is spent, but without it just being procurement being a roadblocker.
Exactly.
And I think that just that is a huge, when you think about the perception of procurement in my experience is often driven by how easy is it to buy the easiest stuff. The stuff that you buy most often, that's the stuff that most of us think, I don't really want to be getting involved in that because it's tactical and not very strategic, and I want to buy all the big stuff and get the big savings. But you have to earn permission for that through how easy you make all the rest of the purchases. And the easier we can make those, the better I think it is for procurement as a function.
Exactly. Touchless processing. Absolutely.
And then that, I agree with you on smaller teams as well, that it is kind of smaller, more impactful. That ties directly into the talent and the capabilities of those teams that remain. But we pull that off, more companies will value strategic procurement. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's less jobs in procurement. It just means that they're spread more broadly across a number of organizations.
And then you're able to manage more influence and manage more spend, right? Because frankly, today in most organizations, the majority of them, certainly, as I said, the category teams tend to be more fixed in structure, right? And then they're sized for peak load, right? As opposed to base load, to use a term from the utilities industry. And we all know that the category management cycle, it's a bit more, it's a roller coaster. You have a lot of activity, and then there's the periods of low activity, and then again it becomes high. And so are we utilizing our resources in the most efficient manner possible? And I would say we are not today. And that's the change I can see happening.
Where do you see organizations accessing the expertise from? If you have this model where you're tapping into experts more on an on-demand basis, are those in outsourcing companies, in kind of pure play procurement consulting firms? Where do they sit?
Yeah, frankly, that one is a little bit of all of the above, right? So depending upon the size of the organization, depending upon their strategy, the capacity, it may vary. So for example, in a captive construct, that's the notion of a COE, right? Where you have an internal COE that provides deep expertise. And by the way, deep expertise in a multitude of things. I truly believe, and I know COEs can be a bit of a dirty word in some companies that have found it not to be very successful. But I think we have to be careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. As a concept, it can actually, and if executed properly, it can be a competitive differentiator, right? COEs can be used for helping with should cost modeling and cost engineering. It could be for data and analytics, compliance management, and so on. And the key there has to be that the operating model needs to be correct. It can't be this ivory tower that stands on the side. It has to be baked into the day-to-day work of a category manager, etc. The internal customer for COE is the rest of the procurement function, right? So that's one. But outside of that, if you don't have the size, the capacity, the budget, whatever, then it can be a little bit more of a managed service that you receive from consulting firms or some of the outsourcing firms.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely a viable alternative.
I feel those outputs have to be built into workflows. The workflows of the teams that are on the ground. I've had a lot of experience in building out captives, before the COE term and in the outsourcing space. And one of the challenges we'd often have is you'd create these wonderful cost models and market intelligence reports and all those things, but then they were never actually acted upon. And so there was no benefit that was ever gotten from them, which creates that friction between the buyers on the ground, the category managers, and the COE in the background. So it's the connection of those is critical.
Exactly. I think it's the same. The theme is the same, right? Whether we talk about technology or whether we talk about organizational constructs like the COE, they have to be embedded in the ways of working for them to have an impact. Otherwise, they just become expensive toys.
Yeah, it's probably a good way of putting it. And definitely had experience with some of those. To go through, you talked about saving money, obviously number one priority, but you mentioned about factoring in generative AI in the context of demand reduction. Should every category strategy have a component of what is Gen AI going to do for me in this category?
I think so. I think Gen AI is going to be truly transformative in how we work. We are still figuring out all the use cases for Gen AI, and they'll continue to evolve as the technology and the capability evolves. But it would be disingenuous for us, for organizations, to think, okay, I'll get to it when it gets to be a mature thing, right? That's like saying I'll buy a laptop when the faster laptop comes around, right? Which means you'll never ever buy a laptop. And so you've got to start jumping into the Gen AI pool, as it were, learning about it, seeing how it can be used. And again, you don't have to go whole hog, right? You can identify a few use cases that are high impact and embrace them, adopt them, scale them, see how that's working. And as the technology improves, as the capabilities increase in your organization and outside, you can continue to expand and scale. But to not the notion of being a fast follower versus being a leader, I'm not sure that's necessarily the best answer in this specific case. And so category managers must and should, yes. The short answer is yes.
What was interesting, we interviewed a lady called Mary Perk. Mary is the executive director of AI at Wharton, and Wharton put out a study looking at AI adoption across various different business functions. And procurement actually ranked as the #1 function across an organization where AI had been adopted in the last 12 months or so, which, is surprising to us who think that procurement and as experienced procurement as being more slower at driving change. But something you mentioned earlier is that your experience now is that procurement really is looking at adopting Gen AI and AI tools and figuring out how to build that into capability.
And I think as part of it, Phil, is because it has such a clear value proposition. And again, this is one where we have to be impact back versus technology forward, right? So if we can identify what are the specific pain points that a particular company is facing in procurement, and then identify what are the Gen AI use cases that could help alleviate, mitigate, improve, if you will, those pain points, then you have a much higher chance of success. The other, frankly, chance of success is making sure that you only identify 2 or 3, maybe 2, if you will, not 20. But then you get into pilot purgatory, right? And then you'll never scale, you'll never get the impact. But we certainly at McKinsey are serving clients in this space with proof of values that are then getting scaled out. And we've seen real impact. And I'm happy to elaborate on that as well.
I'd love to know what some of those use cases are where you are seeing the biggest benefit.
So a couple that I think that come to my mind, and I can maybe even, without mentioning client names, actually talk about some of the stuff that we've done. One, across the broader source to pay space, right? There is one of the ones that is very exciting for category managers is this notion of a co-pilot, which allows, and not to confuse it with Microsoft's co-pilot, right? Just the concept of a co-pilot that provides real-time access to market insights and analysis at the desktop, if you will, or the laptop of a category manager for them to develop category strategies. So imagine a co-pilot doing your Porter's 5 forces and analysis, your SWOT analysis, etc. That up until now the category manager was having to do. The co-pilot is synthesizing internal and external data, reams and reams of it in a much faster, more effective manner. And yes, it may not be 100%, but even if it is 60 or 70%, it's not only an efficiency boost, but the quality of that strategy is going to be that much better, right? Another one is in the area of contracting, the notion of actually looking at your unstructured data. That's one of the beauties of Gen AI, right? The ability to ingest unstructured data, PDF files that hitherto you could do nothing with unless you had some human reviewing them page by page. But now you ingest, hundreds of pages of PDF files, extract the appropriate terms and conditions, commercial clauses, general T's and C's, and so on, and then benchmark them and generate insights on how you can optimize those T's and C's based on the leakage that you have inadvertently inherited because you didn't have the right T's and C's. And these can be, the source of impact, and here can be mitigation of risk when you're looking at your LOL or indemnity clauses. It could be savings when you're looking at the kinds of tenure discounts you're getting in craft labor or your payment terms, etc. So that's another interesting one. A third one is, getting even more tactical, reconciling your invoices with your contracts. So are the invoices that suppliers submit reflective of all the tiered discounts, rebates, etc., that you had negotiated in the contract? Right. And so those are, and then generating the appropriate insights and documents that you can then share with your suppliers with the appropriate fact base to say, hey, hang on, this invoice is not correct. And you can do this proactively, like after the fact, or you can do it real time so that you don't even have money leaving the door versus having to claw back the overpayments, right?
Real-time auditing.
It's real-time auditing, precisely. So I give you those. There are obviously the other ones like generating draft RFPs or draft contracts and so on and so forth. I just thought I'd touch upon a couple of these. And, we served a global pharma life sciences client and looked at just their R&D spend. And these are very complex, multi-year clinical trial agreements. They had inflation indices built in because they were multi-year. They were global, so you had foreign exchange, complexities. And then even from a discount and rebate structure perspective, Phil, they had a whole myriad of discount structures: one-time contract extension discount, a spend-based volume discount, a new award discount, a non-compete discount. And some applied in some cases, but did not apply in others. So just think of the army of people you would need to figure out.
It's a full-time job just managing that contract.
Exactly, and just for that one contract. And now enter Gen AI, right? And you can do that in a matter of minutes. So I think, and we found on average about 4% of leakage. We also found a lot of maverick spend, opportunities where procurement could include improve its influence because there was a lot of recurring spend that was not on contracts. So all of that, again, is real tangible value, and it's a case of how Gen AI is unlocking it.
I asked you this question when we chatted before at an AOP event last month, but I think it's really important and pertinent to this conversation. It's around data. You talked about a variety of different data sources that would be used, for example, by generative AI in being that co-pilot from a market intelligence perspective. And I think that one of the objections that I hear the most is we can't go on this journey yet because we've got bad data, and that becomes while it's a very easy kind of objective to understand because we talk about good data in, good data out, but are we overplaying that as an objection to cover for kind of fear of the unknown?
I do think that's the case. There is the case. And yes, okay, you may not, yes, it's always good to have really good data, but you don't have to have, let's not let perfect be the enemy of good, right? And with the data you've got, you can still drive a lot of impact, right? With what you've got. And let's not forget the idea of Gen AI being able to help you improve your data.
Yeah.
So if I think about this use case of an app evaluating your vendor master records, identifying what are the gaps, inconsistencies, etc., generating emails to suppliers, asking them for information to come back and then populate your and improve the quality of your vendor master records. In all of these cases, by the way, it's important to note, people shouldn't think that this is just, you know, Gen AI bots going wild. There'll always be and should be a human in the loop, right? Just in the spirit of responsible AI, and so that way you still are able to improve the quality of your data while still having the human control element.
How are you seeing companies kind of set up governance around the use of AI in procurement? You know, is that something that sits within a COE? Is it something that you know, there's somebody who's specifically responsible for? I'd love to know kind of the different philosophies on managing that.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? We've seen quite a bit of evolution, right, just in the last year alone. So the adoption of Gen AI just has been massive, right? Because it is so easy. I mean, people are using it. I used it the other day to plan a travel itinerary for us, you know. And it was, and what I got back was fantastic. So the adoption is high. So that in itself is a bane and a boon, right? Which is that because of that, there's just a proliferation of use cases, and different businesses, and not just procurement, but different parts of an organization, the business units, finance, HR, procurement, and so on. Everyone's got their own share of Gen AI use cases. And in the very, very early stages, it was a little bit of let a thousand flowers bloom. I think with almost gay abandon, right? People are like, okay, not thinking about responsible, you know, the biases, the risks.
Just trying it, like throwing in and experimenting.
Experimenting, exactly. And it's a pretty lethal thing, right? Because there can have personal biases, biases of inaccuracies. I mean, as I often like to say, Gen AI has a confidence problem. It's not always correct, but it's never unsure.
Yeah.
But that was in the very early stages. As we are seeing and engaging with clients on these studies, we are starting to see the creation of enterprise AI councils that becomes a governance body that also then helps evaluate each of the different use cases, assess the risk associated with them, assess the impact, and then that allows it to prioritize which ones do we go after across the organization, so not just in procurement. And then in some cases, they decide not to do it because they think it's too risky. So kind of seeing a little bit of that happening, and it's being done not at a functional level, but at an enterprise level.
How does procurement tap into that then, or influence some of the decisions at that level?
I mean, then procurement becomes one of many contributors of use cases, and it has to have a solid business case to justify why the company needs to invest its scarce funds in the procurement Gen AI use case versus in a sales and marketing Gen AI use case, right? I actually think procurement has an advantage here because of the value proposition being very tangible and being very measurable. We are finding at least that procurement Gen AI use cases are not only bubbling to the top, but are often getting the funding that companies are investing in.
Interesting. Well, a positive. I think it's positive as well that procurement is the driver of some of those use cases, as opposed to. I always see this as both a risk and an opportunity for procurement. You know, be the driver of the use case, and then you're kind of in control of your own destiny, as opposed to have somebody, make a decision outside of procurement on what a use case is to outsource procurement with AI, and then you have no control over what procurement looks like. So I know it's about time to wrap up, Samir. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. One last question, just as we kind of look back in 12 months' time, if we're looking back on AI adoption, generative AI adoption within the procurement function itself, like how much I think 2024 has been a year of a lot of progress. What's your projections on 2025, and whether that pace continues or whether we slow down and focus on some specific use cases? I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
If I were to summarize, I would say last year was a year of talking. This year has been a year of doing. I would hope 2025, we're having the same conversation at this time next year, it would be a year of scaling.
Right.
This year, there's been a lot more of, okay, let's move from thought to action, but the action has been much more a proof of concepts, proof of values, more limited, testing the waters. Is there a there? Does it work? Failing fast in some cases, and then moving to the right use cases, etc. But then ultimately, a proof of concept is just demonstrating there's a value. It's about to achieve the full impact, you have to scale it across the categories, across the organization, across the different stakeholder groups. And I'm hoping that some of these more successful proof of concepts will then get scaled, and we can talk about the full impact from Gen AI.
Yeah, and that will then help the followers, I think, put their foot, firmly into the water, to then those that are on the sidelines kind of watching and waiting to see that, well, this is and can be transformative, and it's something not to fear, but something to embrace.
That's right. Exactly.
All right. Well, like I say, it's time to wrap up, Samir. So I want to thank you again so much for joining me on the podcast. We will just put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for today's episode. For anyone that's listening, that's going to be artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast. And of course, a link to McKinsey as well. So one last time, thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy holidays, Phil.
Thank you.